Welcome to another Mathologer video. Are you familiar with this strange infinitely long horn over there? It first made the news 400 years ago and it turned its discoverer Evangelista Torricelli into a mathematical superstar. Why? Well, Torricelli's horn has a very paradoxical property. Suppose you've got 8 liters of paint. Then you can fill the horn to the brim. Let's do it. Turn it around, fill. In other words, the volume of the horn is 8 liters. Now comes the weird bit. The surface area of the shape is infinite. Finite volume and infinite area. How is that possible? Also, when we fill the horn with 8 liters of paint, we are also completely painting the inside surface, right? In other words, when it comes to this strange horn, it is possible to paint an infinite surface area with a finite amount of paint. Let that sink in for a moment. Sink in. No pun intended. Okay, the pun was intended. We are painting an infinite surface area with a finite amount of paint. That weirdness is commonly called the painter's paradox. Actually, I just discovered a second painter's paradox. I call it the YouTube painter's paradox. There are lots of YouTube videos dedicated to explaining the painter's paradox, and when it comes to actually taming the volume and the surface area of Torricelli's horn, there are 2 approaches that YouTubers take. The first approach consists in unleashing the full force of calculus on the problem. Derivatives, integrals, the works. The second approach involves the vigorous waving of hands, proclaiming repeatedly how amazing all this is, and really not explaining anything of essence at all. Possibly because our YouTuber thinks that their audience cannot handle the calculus. Where's the paradox in all that? Well, it turns out that you don't need any calculus whatsoever. To get the volume and area of the horn under control, the only thing you need is a simple algebraic trick that a mathematical monk came up with 700 years ago. A trick that all math YouTubers will almost certainly be familiar with. Pretty strange, right? Why is everybody using calculus or is being scared of calculus, since there is a much simpler way? Especially on YouTube, where simple is king. Why do you think that is? Leave your answers to these puzzling questions in the comments. Okay, so today's mission is to give a complete calculus-free explanation of the painter's paradox. Even if you're a pro and have one of those horns rattling around somewhere in a cupboard, stick around, for I've got some really nice twists to this popular tale lined up for you. Here we go. How is this particular horn built? Very simple. Take 1 over x and focus on the part of the curve to the right of x is equal to 1. Now simply spin the curve around the x-axis. Alright. The resulting surface of revolution is our horn. Actually, we get a second copy of the horn by also spinning the part of our 1 over x curve to the left of x is equal to 1 around the y-axis. There. Let's save this second horn for later. Now, let's figure out what the surface area of this horn is. My last 2 videos also dealt with some magical properties of 1 over x, and today's video actually completes this first Mathologer trilogy in the history of the channel. If you've watched one of those 2 earlier videos, you may be able to guess what comes next. What comes after x is equal to 1? Yep, x is equal to 2, and at x is equal to 2, 1 over x takes on the value 1/2. Extend to a rectangle like this. This rectangle is 1 unit wide, and so its area is, base times height, 1 times 1/2 equals 1/2. So the area is equal to its height. At 3 we got 1/3. Extend to another 1 unit wide rectangle. Again the area is equal to the height, 1/3. And so on. This means that the area of the gray staircase is the sum of all these rectangle areas. 1/2 plus 1/3 plus 1/4 plus 1/5 and so on. The experts among you will immediately recognize this infinite sum, except for a missing one right at the start. It's the famous harmonic series, which every maths demon knows adds to infinity. In the second part of the video, I'll use that 700-year-old trick twice, and the first time will be to show that this infinite sum is equal to infinity. In any case, for now, just trust me that the gray staircase has infinite area. But now, Since the horn encloses the staircase as it does, it is clear that the surface area of the horn must also be equal to infinity. Easy, right? Okay, getting there. Now, what about the volume? That's trickier, but for our paradox, we don't have to calculate the precise volume. We just have to show that the volume is less than infinity. It's finite. So how can we see that the volume is finite? Here's a nice trick. Extend the staircase by one step to the left, there. Move the whole staircase one unit to the right, okay, there. Aligns again perfectly along 1 over x, but now the staircase contains the curve rather than the curve containing the staircase. Now spin the first rectangle, well, really that's a square, spin that square around the x-axis. That creates a cylinder. What's the volume of the cylinder? Well, the volume formula for a cylinder is circular base times height, pi r squared times height. You remember that from school, right? Now, what's the radius and what's the height? Well, obviously the height is 1 and so is the radius. And so the volume of the cylinder is pi times 1 squared, just pi. Spin the second rectangle into a cylinder. We calculate its volume in exactly the same way. The only difference is the radius, and so we just have to replace the 1 by 1/2 to get the new volume. And so on. And so, the volume of this infinite funnel of cylinders is just the sum of the cylinders. Now, the horn is completely contained in the funnel of cylinders, and so the volume of the horn must be less than that of the funnel. This means that if we can show that the infinite sum in the brackets is finite, then it follows that the volume of the horn is finite too. Is that clear? Right? If the sum is finite, then the volume of the funnel is finite, and so is the horn contained within. Slick, huh? Okay, so showing that the surface area is infinite and the volume is finite boils down to showing that the sums of these two pretty infinite series are infinite and finite respectively. And the only thing we need to prove both facts is that 700-year-old trick that I keep going on about. Well, actually, we also need this second fact here. 1 plus 1/2 plus 1/4 plus 1/8 and so on, the sum of the reciprocals of the powers of 2 is equal to 2. You've seen that 1,000 times before, right? Why is that true again? Well, here's a proof by animation. All clear? Good. Okay, remember this for later. 1 plus 1/2 plus 1/4 and so on is equal to 2. Now, we want to convince ourselves that the harmonic series at the top adds to infinity. The first recorded proof of this fact is, did I mention this before? 700 years old. And is due to the mathematical monk Nicole Orem. Bear with me if all this sounds familiar. There will be a twist at the end. In fact, Orem also came up with a 2D version of our paradoxical horn 300 years before Torricelli. Just take the visual geometric infinite sum from before and turn it into an infinitely tall tower like this. Then obviously the interior of this tower is of finite area 2. On the other hand, its bounding curves are clearly of infinite length, right? That's a proper 2D counterpart of our horn and is paradoxical for the same reasons as the horn is, but is much easier to comprehend. Unfortunately for Orem, nobody remembered his example by the time the horn first made headlines, and so Torricelli didn't have to share the fame for his discovery. Oh, I should also mention that Orem also came up with the first ever graphs. So all of you who hate graphing, this is the guy to blame. Anyway, back to our infinite series and Orem's super famous trick. Let's do this on Algebra Autopilot, accompanied by some funky music. All clear so far? the top sum is greater or equal to the bottom sum. Now we add up all the terms in the colored boxes, and that's where the magic happens. Okay, let's do that one. 2/4, that's 1/2. Okay, what about this one here? That's 4/8, and that's 1/2. And what about that one here? That's 8/16, that's 1/2. There, infinitely many 1/2s. And obviously, the sum of these infinitely many 1/2s is infinity. Okay, so far, so good. Well, the experts among you are probably yawning at this point, but here's something you've probably not seen before. Turns out you can take care of the second series in exactly the same way. Very nifty. Here's the second series. Just now we started by highlighting the reciprocals of the powers of 2. This time we'll highlight the reciprocals of the squares of the powers of 2. There. Make a copy. Earlier we filled in the gaps going left like this. Now we'll go the other way. Fill in, fill in, fill in. Earlier the terms at the top were always the same or greater than the corresponding ones at the bottom, right? Now it's the other way around. Just a spot check to make sure that this really is the case. There, 1/9 at the top is smaller than 1/4 at the bottom. 1/25 at the top is smaller than 1/16, and so on. And that means that the top sum is smaller than the bottom sum. Now, let's add up the terms in the colored boxes. There we go. Okay, it's 1/2 again. What about this one here? Something cancels here. It's 1/4. Okay, what about that one here? Can you already see? Okay, cancel. That's 1/8. Aha! So what we've got here is our 1 plus 1/2 plus 1/4 sum from before, which, as we all remember, is equal to 2. But then if our sum is less than 2, that means it's finite. Well, okay, so we know that the volume of Torricelli's horn is finite, which is really all we need to be sure that our horn is as paradoxical as advertised. But I also claimed that the volume is exactly 8, and that I can also show this without using Leibniz and Newton's calculus. I still owe you that proof. Actually, this is not my proof at all. This proof is due to Torricelli, the discoverer of the horn, and this proof is really beautiful. Remember, the vertical copy of the horn that we saved for later, we'll use it now. Actually, we'll first ponder the horn that has been extended by a cylinder at the bottom like so. So a horn with a mute. Considered as a solid shape, we can think of this extended horn as being made up of thinner cylinders with the y-axis as the common axis. There, that's one of these cylinders. That's another one, and another one, and that one, and lots of them. All right, let's figure out the surface area of this thin cylinder without the circular caps. So just the area of the mantle, okay? What's that area? Well, that's just the circumference of the base circle times the height. And what's that circumference? Well, if the radius is r, then the circumference is 2 pi r. What's the height? Well, that's the value of 1 over x at r. And so the height is 1 over r. All the r's cancel and so completely vanish. Cool. The area is 2 pi. But of course, the same is the case for all other thin cylinders. Same calculation, same result. That's super cool. All the areas of all the thin cylinders have the same area, 2 pi. Okay, now to figure out the volume, Torricelli argues like this. Put a disk of area 2 pi here. So the disk has the same area as the thin cylinder. If you do the same for every one of the thin cylinders, you get this stack of disks. So there is one circular disk per thin cylinder, both having the same area, 2 pi. The thin cylinders combine into our extended horn, and at the same time the disks combine into our stack. Therefore, Torricelli says, the volumes of both solids must be the same. And so what's the volume? Well, the stack is just a cylinder with base area 2 pi and height 1. And so the volume is base area times height, 2 pi times 1 equals 2 pi. Super pretty way of reasoning, don't you think? Predates Newton and Leibniz's calculus, but is only made rigorous and extended to the famous method of shells as part of calculus. Now, what about the volume of the horn? That's what we were really interested in. Well, the volume of our horn, that's just the volume of the extended horn minus the volume of the cylinder at the bottom. And as you can easily check, the volume of the orange cylinder is equal to pi, and so the volume of the horn is 2 pi minus pi, which is pi. But didn't I also say that the volume of the horn is 8? Well, yes, I lied. The volume is pi. Well, I've long been dead set on eventually having that fun animation of an 8 turning into an infinity sign in one of my videos, and this was the perfect opportunity to sneak this animation in. Let's just do it again. Ah, so nice. Gotta do this, right? Having said that, if we stretch our horn vertically by a factor of 8 over pi, we actually do get a horn with volume 8 and infinite surface area. And so I hope you can forgive me my little lie. Okay, so we proved that our horn is really as paradoxical as we claimed at the beginning. And of course, now that you know that this is the case, you want one of those horns. You jump on eBay and nothing to be found. Sad. Well, just in case you have not guessed yet, that infinite horn is something that only exists in an ideal mathematical world. It has 0 thickness and it gets slimmer and slimmer as we travel along it to infinity. In fact, eventually it will be slimmer than even an atom. And so not even a virtual atom-based counterpart of real paint can completely fill this imaginary horn. And when I said at the beginning that we're painting an infinite surface area with a finite amount of paint, that it is also important to realize that for this to work, we not only need an ideal mathematical horn, but also ideal mathematical paint. Paint that can be applied as thin as we wish and that still covers the surface we are painting no matter how thin it is applied. You can also not buy this sort of paint in the paint shop down the street. Well, and that's all there is to the painter's paradox. In general, this kind of paradox is quite common with infinity. Infinity is not something that exists in the real world. It's simply a mathematical idea. And once you realize that, it should not come as too much of a surprise that otherworldly creatures behave different from real-world horns and paint. Let me know in the comments how this calculus-free exposition of the painter's paradox worked for you and how it compares to some other expositions on YouTube that you may be familiar with. Let me finish with a fun fact that I stumbled across while reading up on the history of Torricelli's horn and the painter's paradox. Have a look at this book featuring some of Torricelli's writing that was published after his death. There, that's Torricelli on the left. Now let's have a close look at what it says underneath. Well, there's the Latin version of Torricelli's name at the bottom, Evangelista Torricellius. And at the top it says, En virescit Galileo's alter, which is Latin for here blossoms another Galileo. Basically, people were really impressed by Torricelli and thought of him as a second Galileo. Actually, Torricelli was a student of Galileo's, and apart from being famous all over Europe as a mathematician, he also made a name for himself as a physicist. Among other things, he's also famous for inventing the barometer. Anyway, here comes that fun bit. Have a look at the word in the middle, anagram. What could that possibly mean? Well, anagram, of course. The sentence at the top is an anagram of the name at the bottom. In other words, you can rearrange the letters at the top into the letters at the bottom and the other way around. Cool! I thought it would be fun to animate this rearrangement, and here is what I came up with. That's so unexpected, don't you think? What's also unexpected is that we are actually not dealing with a perfect anagram, that Galileo's here is not quite right. Turns out that the A in Galileo's at the top and the O in Torricellius at the bottom don't have counterparts. Weird, huh? Anyway, I agree with whoever invented this almost anagram. Close enough is fun enough. And that's it for today. Until next time.